In many drafts, there's a clear number one pick whose identity is known for as much as a year in advance. But in others, the debate is far from clear, with discourse starting as soon as a year or even 2 years out from draft night. Today, in the first episode of a recurring series, we will look at each draft class, the top 10 picks specifically, and determine if each team hit, miss, or kinda somewhere in the middle on each of their draft picks. Today, we are looking at the 2010 NBA draft, an incredibly solid draft in retrospect. Fun fact about this draft, it set a record with 5 players being drafted from the same school in the first round. John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Patrick Patterson, Eric Bledsoe, and Daniel Orton, all from the University of Kentucky, were selected within the first 29 picks. Number 1, John Wall. The consensus number 1 pick at the time, John Wall mostly lived up to the hype in the first 8 years of his career with the Wiz before missing most of the past or the final 2 seasons with major injuries. At his peak, he was one of the fastest, most explosive point guards in the NBA over the past decade. Despite never really being a great perimeter shooter, he was an undeniably elite playmaker and creator, and was honestly a fantastic defender who read passing lanes well and navigated screens wisely. From 2013 to 2018, he had an on-off rating of plus 7.8, and in the playoffs that jumped to plus 9.4. Wall made 5 straight All-Star teams from 2014 to 2018, and was named 3rd team All-NBA in 2017, and even received All-NBA votes in 2014 and 2015 as well. Wall and his teammate Bradley Beal led the Wizards to the franchise's best stretch in years, gradually dragging the team out of the laughingstock years of the late 2000s into Eastern Conference respectability. They made the playoffs 4 out of 5 seasons from 2014 to 2018 and had a fairly decent shot at making the conference finals in 3 of those seasons, most notably in 2017 when they went 7 games with the Isaiah Thomas Boston Celtics. The one knock on Wall's career had always been his health. He suffered various knee and wrist injuries over the years that caused him to miss time, and during the 2018-2019 season, he suffered a torn Achilles that essentially took him out of his prime. Despite that, John Wall was undeniably a hit for Washington at number 1. Number 2, the Philadelphia 76ers select Evan Turner. Turner was seen as ready to play in the NBA at multiple positions with some easily translatable skills, in addition to a healthy dose of defensive versatility as he was coming out of Ohio State. It was seen as somewhat peculiar even then, since the Sixers already had Andre Iguodala on the team. Iggy would make things even more complicated for the Sixers, as he would make his first and only All-Star team in 2012, which just so happened to be Evan Turner's sophomore year. The Sixers were at a crossroads, and they ended up deciding to move on from Iggy by trading him to Denver in a 4-team deal in the summer of 2012. Evan Turner, on the other hand, while he did eventually find some utility as a role player later in his career, his Sixer tenure wasn't what you'd hope for from a number 2 overall pick that was 6'7" and 220 pounds. Turner did get better and better with each passing season, even averaging a career-high 17.4 points per game in 2014, but the writing was on the wall that his time in the city of brotherly love was rapidly coming to a close, as the team had very little interest in extending a supersized point guard who couldn't consistently knock down a 3-point shot. Now, while the team did play well early in his Sixer tenure, making the playoffs in both 2011 and 2012, they simply couldn't get over the hump and become legitimate playoff contenders. And that especially ended when they risked it all on the now infamous Andrew Bynum trade. With free agency fast approaching and no long-term role in Brett Brown's rebuilding process for a 25-year-old bust, Hinkie ended up flipping Evan Turner and Temple alum Lavoy Allen to the Indiana Pacers for an eventually bought-out Danny Granger and a second-round pick, kicking off the process. And just like that, the Evan Turner era was over in Philadelphia, and despite some okay seasons, it's hard to call it anything else but a miss. Number 3, the New Jersey Nets select Derek Favors. Favors was an extremely popular player coming out of college. His offensive game still needed polishing, but he was seen as a high-level shot blocker and rebounder, drawing some comps to a young Dwight Howard. And while Favors eventually developed into a reliable player, it wasn't for the team that drafted him. Favors played only 56 games for New Jersey before he was traded to Utah in the Darren Williams trade. And even though he spent the better part of a decade as a consistent starter, stout defender, good rebounder, and fan favorite for a competitive Utah team, you have to call this a miss for the Nets, especially considering they only got all-star level Darren Williams for about a season in return. Number 4, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Wesley Johnson. Johnson never lived up to his billing as a top 5 pick and never really found value on a competitive team until he found 18 minutes per game for the last couple seasons of the Lob City Clippers. He was seen as an NBA-ready player with a fluid offensive game and had the ability to hit the three while excelling with his jump shot inside the arc. But none of that proved true, as he struggled to score and even score efficiently out of the gate. He only played 2 seasons for the T-Wolves before he was traded to the Suns before the 2013 season. This is a miss. Number 5, DeMarcus Cousins. Like his former Kentucky teammate, Cousins had a short peak as one of the most dominant players in the NBA at his position before a series of major injuries left his career in doubt. Heading into the draft, the big man was largely seen as the second most talented player on the board, but concerns about his demeanor saw him fall to Sacramento at number 5. And those concerns weren't unfounded by any means, as he clashed with coaches and management repeatedly during his time in Sacramento. But his talent was undeniable, and he eventually put together a nice stretch in Sacktown. At his peak, specifically from 2014 to 2016, he was one of the most ferocious rebounders in the league and a very good rim protector to boot. Although never terribly efficient on offense, never much better than league average, he had a profound impact for the Kings while on the court. Unfortunately, Sacramento never could put together a cohesive roster around him, and his clashes and demeanor didn't really do himself any favors either. The Kings traded Cousins to the New Orleans Pelicans at the 2017 trade deadline, and interestingly enough, he and Anthony Davis became a dominant frontcourt duo in their short time together before Cousins suffered a torn Achilles in January of 2018. Perhaps a topic for another time, but at the end of the day, the Kings did select a future All-NBA player in the top 5, and you have to call that a hit. Number 6, Ekpe Udoh to the Golden State Warriors. Another top 10 pick who never quite lived up to the billing of a franchise guy, Udoh nevertheless hung around for nearly a decade in the league as a capable 4th big. Udoh was seen as a gifted defender, but even at the time was seen as a bit of a reach being taken at number 6 when he likely would have gone in the bottom third of the lottery. Udoh only played a season and a half for the Warriors before he found a home in Milwaukee for a few years, and then eventually contributed to the early Donovan Mitchell-Rudy Gobert Jazz teams in 2018 and 2019 off the bench, and then played overseas. Fun fact, he actually just recently got announced as an assistant coach under Quinn Snyder in Atlanta just this past month in June of 2023. At the end of the day, as for his playing career, in Golden State specifically, it's a miss. Number 7, Greg Monroe to the Detroit Pistons. Monroe was the perfect example of an old-school big man, someone who perhaps would have flourished 20 to 30 years before he was drafted, as his style of play was slowly starting to get phased out by the early to mid-2010s. That being said, he was more than solid for the first few years of his career for his draft team. He averaged 14-9 over 5 seasons with Detroit and improved every year as a Piston. He produced a stellar 2015 campaign where he was good for 16-10 behind a solid post-game, even though he'd never really developed into a star or even an elite defender. He signed a 3-year deal with Milwaukee in 2015, bringing his time in Detroit to a close. At the end of the day, I'll give Detroit a kinda for the Greg Monroe pick. Number 8, the LA Clippers select Farouq Aminu. Aminu was another late bloomer, beginning his career as a journeyman while bouncing around from the Clippers to the New Orleans Hornets to the Dallas Mavericks and establishing himself as an outstanding defender but in need of a consistent jump shot in order to stay on the floor. His career really took off in 2015 when he signed a 4-year deal with the Blazers. After that, his shooting improved dramatically, with his three-point percentage jumping from the high 20s to the mid-30s, and was a consistent starter on 4 straight playoff teams in Portland, but talking strictly of his performance in LA, it left a lot to be desired. The Clips moved on from him immediately after his rookie season, as he was included in the trade package that landed LA Chris Paul. Understandable move, but the pick by consequence is a miss. Number 9, Gordon Hayward. After a standout college career at Butler, Hayward went number 9 to Utah in the draft. His career started slow, but he eventually developed into one of the West's most consistent and lethal scoring wings and filled into his 6'7", 225-pound frame. He steadily improved each and every year of his career and was a borderline all-star in 2015 and 2016, and in 2017 was finally selected to his lone all-star appearance. A season which was an awesome scoring campaign by any measure, where he averaged 22, 5, and 4 on 47, 40, 84 shooting splits. He was an awesome pull-up three-point shooter, a solid finisher at the rim, and someone whose scoring ability opened up his playmaking as well. That year, he helped the Jazz to their first playoff series win since 2010. And even though he left in free agency for Boston in the summer of 2017, the Jazz scored themselves a future All-Star, making this pick a hit for Utah. Number 10, the Indiana Pacers select Paul George. PG gets the honor of being the best player from the 2010 draft class. I don't think that's particularly controversial. But he wasn't seen to have that potential from the get-go, hence his going 10th. PG was seen as a bit of a risk for Indiana at number 10. He played for a poor team in Fresno State and didn't necessarily dominate at the college level despite playing in a pretty weak conference. But what was tantalizing about PG were his physical gifts and consequently the upside of those physical gifts. It does seem like one Eastern Conference scout got it right, as 2 days before the draft, Mark J. Spears wrote an article in which that anonymous scout said that in 5 years' time, PG would be the best player from the 2010 draft. Even then, the Pacers nearly missed out on him. They were hoping to draft Derek Favors. The Pacers had actually discussed a draft day trade with the Nets that would have sent Danny Granger and the 10th pick to the Nets for Devin Harris, Yi Jin-lan, and the 3rd overall pick, but the deal fell through. PG got an opportunity in Indiana earlier than expected because of injury issues for former All-Star small forward Danny Granger, and he quickly established himself as one of the NBA's best two-way players. The Pacers made the playoffs in his rookie season. Their core of PG, David West, George Hill, Lance Stevenson, and Roy Hibbert was a consistent presence in the postseason for most of the ensuing half-decade. By his second season, he was a full-time starter, and by his third, he won Most Improved Player and earned his first All-NBA, All-Defense, and first All-Star appearance, most notably leading Indiana to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they went 7 games with LeBron's Heat. 2014 only got better as PG went 22, 7, and 4 and helped stabilize a legendary Pacer defense, one that alongside the likes of Roy Hibbert and David West had a defensive rating of 99.1 when PG was on the court, over 7 points better than league average. He suffered a broken leg in the summer of 2014 at a USA Basketball exhibition, causing him to miss most of the 2015 season. But in one of the more remarkable stories of resilience in NBA history, he picked up right where he left off, arguably better than ever. Though the Pacer roster slowly changed around him and Indiana was not nearly as dominant as they were in 2013 and 2014, PG was the stabilizing force of a Pacer team that remained competitive and made the playoffs in 2016 and 2017. In those 2 seasons, he averaged 23, 7, and 4 on slightly above league average true shooting efficiency. The Pacers were also 6.8 points per 100 possessions better when he was on the floor. Of course, he'd moved to OKC before the 2018 season and become an MVP candidate there, but it goes without saying that Indiana hit their pick by grabbing the best guy from the 2010 draft.